Welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to take you on this journey today. You know, when most of us look at our DNA, it's pretty easy to just see a family tree, right? Maybe a list of regions on a map. But if we look a little closer, your DNA is actually this epic, ancient survival record. Every single strand is packed with these incredible stories of how your ancestors fought tooth and nail to survive in some of the most unforgiving conditions on Earth. But here is the fascinating twist, and honestly, it's the core paradox we're going to unpack today. What if the exact genetic variant that kept your ancestors alive is the very kryptonite making us sick today? Seriously, the biology that made your ancestors unstoppable might just be the exact thing your body's battling right now.
Section 1. Genetic Superpowers and Kryptonite, the Evolutionary Trade-off.
To really wrap our heads around this, we're going to look at some hidden superpowers from various ancestries. And the crucial concept underlying all of this is something called evolutionary mismatch. Basically, our bodies aren't randomly failing us. They're actually operating perfectly. But they're operating on old software. They're deploying biological traits that were highly advantageous in an ancestral environment, but have become deeply, deeply detrimental in our modern one. This is exactly why it so often feels like our bodies are fighting modern life.
Section 2. Built for extreme climates, surviving the unforgiving Earth.
Okay, let's dive into this, literally, and look at populations that hacked extreme environments. Just look at this number, 50%. This represents the biological superpower of the Bajau people of Southeast Asia. For over 1,000 years, they've lived a completely sea-based lifestyle, freediving daily to depths of 60 meters. And to survive this, they actually evolved spleens that are roughly 50% larger than neighboring populations. It's all driven by selection signals in the PDE10A gene. Why? Well, the spleen acts as a reservoir of oxygenated blood. It's essentially built-in scuba gear, allowing them to do 13-minute dives on a single breath. That is wild. But the trade-off? Outside of diving, that massive spleen offers zero advantage on land and can even carry minor risks during certain malaria-related illnesses.
It's honestly fascinating to see how this plays out across the globe. Take Celtic Ancestry, for example. It is perfectly optimized to capture every single drop of weak UV light for vitamin D in cloudy environments. But drop that exact same biology into bright, sunny Australia, and bam, it becomes a severe melanoma risk. Or think about Middle Eastern and North African populations. They evolved this incredible heat dissipation and water management for 50-degree desert heat. But if they migrate to cold, wet climates, they face severe vitamin D deficiencies. Slavic ancestry gave populations the robust frame and thermal regulation to endure brutal continental winters, but transplant that into a modern sedentary office job and cardiovascular struggles just skyrocket. And Central Asian populations, they're the ultimate environmental generalists, built for extreme mobility across steppes and harsh seasons. Their modern kryptonite is simply that this balanced flexibility gets outperformed by specialists in any single extreme zone.
You know, this brilliantly illustrates how evolution is like a giant puzzle, solving the exact same problem in entirely different ways. Let's look at altitude. Surviving at 4,000 meters means dealing with incredibly thin air. East African Highlanders evolved super-efficient hemoglobin saturation without thickening their blood, which is exactly why their marathon runners today can sprint where lowlanders can barely even walk. But flip to the other side of the world. Indigenous Andean populations solved the very same 4,000-meter problem by increasing their red blood cells and oxygen-carrying capacity. Two brilliant, localized cardiovascular hacks. But if you move these populations to sea level or completely change their diets, that finely tuned machinery can suddenly become a lot less efficient.
Section 3. The Ancestral Diet Paradox, Feasting on Famine.
So, historical scarcity and extreme regional foods essentially shaped our metabolisms forever. I want you to imagine eating a literal stick of butter for breakfast and having absolutely perfect blood work. For some Inuit lineages, that's not a joke, that's survival. With almost no plant food available for half the year, their traditional diet was up to 80% fat from marine mammals and fish. They actually evolved unique variants in the FADS genes, letting them process massive amounts of long-chain omega-3s and saturated fat without the cardiovascular damage it would cause in anyone else. But here comes the modern ambush, and it's brutal. That exact same genome handles processed carbs and refined sugar worse than almost any other population on Earth.
And we're seeing this same kind of devastating trap elsewhere, too. Polynesian populations colonized the Pacific in grueling, weeks-long ocean voyages. Their thrifty genotypes stored energy incredibly aggressively during times of abundance just to survive the inevitable famines. South Asian populations, on the other hand, survived thousands of years of low-calorie, grain-based agriculture under blistering suns, extracting maximum nutrition from minimal food. I mean, these were incredible feats of metabolic efficiency, but throw these finely tuned genomes into the modern ambush of unlimited refined carbs, sugar, and sedentary office work, you get some of the highest global rates of type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome, often at remarkably low body weights.
And speaking of diet, here's a stat that always blows people's minds: 65%. That is the percentage of the global adult population that cannot drink milk. Yeah, if you can digest dairy into adulthood, you're actually the weird outlier. Roughly 10,000 years ago, a mutation for lactase persistence gave Northern Europeans this massive nutritional edge during brutal winters, and it swept through the population rapidly. So digesting milk isn't the human default at all. It's a rapid evolutionary anomaly optimized for a very specific, cold-weather agricultural environment.
Let's look at another fascinating dietary trait tied to agriculture, the East Asian ALDH2 variant. This affects about 40% of East Asians, causing what's often called the Asian flush, redness and nausea after just one drink. Well, it turns out this is a feature, not a bug. Arising alongside rice agriculture 7 to 10,000 years ago, this variant reduces the body's ability to break down toxic acetaldehyde. And why on earth is that an advantage? Because it naturally discourages heavy drinking, which likely provided crucial protection against pathogens in fermenting grain environments. But the modern mismatch here is lethal. If cultural pressures override this genetic stop sign and individuals drink heavily anyway, that unmetabolized acetaldehyde acts as a strong carcinogen, leading to incredibly high risks of esophageal cancer.
Section 4. Surviving Ancient Plagues, the Lethal Compromise. We now arrive at perhaps the most sobering part of our explainer. When the primary threat wasn't the climate or starvation, but deadly disease, evolution made some mathematically brutal compromises. This is known in genetics as the heterozygote advantage, and it's a harsh equation that played out in sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean basin, both historic malaria zones. If you inherit one copy of a specific mutated hemoglobin gene, you get a superpower, strong resistance to severe malaria. This literally saved entire communities. But if you inherit two copies, one from each parent, you develop severe blood disorders, like sickle cell disease in African populations or thalassemia in Mediterranean ones. The evolutionary math worked at the population level to stop a plague, but that trade-off causes immense, lifelong individual suffering for those who inherit the homozygous form today.
We see a completely different kind of historical bottleneck with the Ashkenazi Jewish population. Tracing back to medieval Europe, a founding population of just 350 to 500 individuals, followed by centuries of strict endogamy, created a classic founder effect. Rare genetic variants became highly concentrated. Today, this means the descendant population carries a heavy disease load for conditions like BRCA mutations and Tay-Sachs. Yet remarkably, this exact same genetic concentration is what allowed modern medical genetics to map these global disease genes in the first place. It accelerated treatments that now benefit the entire world.
Section 5. The Modern Genetic Mismatch. Ghosts of the Genome.
This really brings us to the ultimate realization about our health today. We are essentially walking around with the ghosts of the genome, perfectly optimized for worlds we no longer inhabit. When we tie all these dietary stories together, the picture is pretty stark. Indigenous American populations tuned for maize and bison, the Inuit tuned for marine fat, South Asians tuned for agricultural scarcity. Their metabolisms were flawless masterpieces of local engineering. But drop them into a world of modern grocery stores, highly processed foods, and the modern 7-Eleven, it's a metabolic disaster. They're fighting a losing battle against a food system their DNA simply doesn't recognize.
So if there's one thing you take away from this explainer, I want it to be this incredibly empowering thought. We aren't broken. We are just perfectly adapted to a world that no longer exists. Your modern health struggles, your metabolic issues, your dietary intolerances, they're not biological failures. They're the echoes of out-of-place perfection. You are carrying the very armor that kept your ancestors alive.
Which leaves us with one final, kind of wild thought to ponder. If our DNA is this incredible time capsule of ancestral survival, constantly adapting to whatever environment it finds itself in, what new adaptations are we writing into our genome right now? What will our descendants look back on as the hidden advantages or the lethal compromises of the modern age? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.